All right, hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dig into a really cool learning method called content-based instruction, or CBI. This is all based on the work of Mohammad Ridha Abbas Youssef, and honestly, the title says it all. It's the two-for-one deal in learning. Let's find out what that means.
So, let me just ask you this. What if you could learn a subject you're interested in and a new language at the exact same time? Seriously, imagine you need to study biology, but you also really want to learn Spanish. What if you could just do both at once, learning biology through Spanish? Sounds pretty efficient, right? Well, that's the big idea we're talking about today.
And that idea is called content-based instruction, or CBI for short. This isn't your typical language class with endless vocabulary lists. Nope. With CBI, the language isn't really the subject, it's the vehicle. You learn it by actually using it to study something else, like history or science, or hey, even music.
You know, this is a pretty big shift in thinking. People call CBI the strong version of communicative language teaching. You're not just learning how to use the language for some future situation, you're using the language right now to learn something real. This whole idea has some pretty deep roots, coming out of things like the famous French immersion programs in Canada and a similar model over in Europe they call CLIL.
Okay, so we've got the what, but now for the why. Why does this actually work so well? To really get it, we need to look at the foundations of CBI, the theories behind it that make it so powerful.
So CBI really stands on two big pillars. First, there's the linguistic side. Here, language stops being this thing you just study, like an object in a museum. It becomes a tool, something you actually use to build with. You're using authentic stuff, real articles, real textbooks, and you're naturally using all four skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Then there's the psychological side, which is just genius. It hooks into what students already know and care about, so their motivation just goes through the roof. And if we dig a little deeper on that psychological side, we find the secret sauce. It comes from a psychologist named Lev Vygotsky, and it's called the zone of proximal development. Now, I know that sounds super academic, but the idea is actually incredibly simple, and it's the key to the whole thing.
And that key is something called scaffolding. Just think of the scaffolding on the side of a building, right? It's a temporary support that helps workers get to places they couldn't reach on their own. In the classroom, the teacher does the same thing. They provide support, maybe some key vocabulary or visuals that helps students tackle a challenge they couldn't handle alone. That support lets them work in that zone of proximal development, that perfect sweet spot where real learning happens.
Okay, so theory is one thing, but what does this actually look like when the bell rings? What's going on in the classroom? Let's break down who does what, starting with the teacher.
In a CBI class, the teacher isn't just a lecturer at the front of the room. Not at all. They're more like a guide, a facilitator. Their job is super dynamic. They've got to set goals for both the subject and the language. They create activities, they provide that scaffolding we just talked about, and they're constantly using examples and visuals to make sure everything is clear. They guide the learning. They don't just pour out information.
So, if the teacher is the guide, then the student has to be an active participant. You can't just sit back and listen. Students are expected to really engage with everything, to work together, and to use tools to help them think. They're not just memorizing facts, they're building critical thinking skills. And maybe the best part, they learn that language has a real, actual purpose.
Now, any good system has a set of rules that makes it tick, so let's look at the guiding principles of CBI. You can think of these as the rules of the game that make sure everybody wins.
Principle number one is the big one, dual focus. This brings us right back to that two-for-one idea. In every single lesson, there are two goals. One is for the content, like understanding the causes of a historical event. The other is for the language, like mastering the right verb tenses to describe that event. And they are both treated as equally important.
Next up, principle 2, relevance equals motivation. It's so simple. When students see that the language is a tool they need for something they actually care about, learning stops feeling like a chore. That personal connection is maybe the most powerful motivator you can have.
All right, principle 3. Context is king. I mean, think about it. Our brains are just not wired to learn from random lists of words. We learn things when they're connected to something meaningful. That's why in CBI, you learn a word like photosynthesis while you're actually reading about plants, not just from a flashcard. It just sticks.
And that brings us to our fourth principle, which is that support is absolutely essential. You can't just hand a language learner a complicated physics textbook and say, good luck. It doesn't work that way. The teacher has to provide that scaffolding, that support system, to build a bridge so students can access that challenging real-world material.
So this all sounds great in theory, right? The principles are clear, the roles make sense, but how do schools actually pull this off? Let's take a look at how CBI works out there in the real world.
One of the best things about CBI is that it's flexible. There are a few common ways to do it. One is called sheltered instruction, where one teacher is trained to teach both the subject and the language support techniques. Another popular way is team teaching, where you have a subject expert and a language expert working together in the same class. And then there's the adjunct model, where a student takes a regular college course, like economics, but also takes a special language class that's designed to support it.
And really, it all comes back to this one simple, powerful idea. This is the core promise of CBI. You're not choosing between content and language, you're getting both. As the quote says, students get 2 for 1. They gain both content knowledge and increased language proficiency. It's that simple. And when you think about it, that makes CBI an incredibly efficient and effective way to learn. For anyone who needs both academic skills and language skills, like students moving to a new country or studying abroad for university, this approach isn't just a nice idea, it's an absolute game changer.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Just for a second, forget about the grammar drills. If you could learn any language right now, by diving into a subject you're passionate about, what would you pick? Would you learn Italian by studying Renaissance art? Or maybe learn Japanese by building robots? Just think about the possibilities.